My name is Paul Bailey. I'm going to be, I call this talk a guide to bad programming. All right, let's get started here. All right, so a little bit about me. Like I said, I'm Paul Bailey. I usually go by Pizza Panther, so I'm on GitHub, Twitter. I don't have any business cards, but I actually brought a Bluetooth beacon. So I might have spammed your phone already, so you can check your notification bar. I have my Twitter links and stuff on there. I'm based out of League City. I organized the Pi Houston web meetup. I'm also a developer. I actually work remotely out of Berkeley, and then, but like I said, I work remote. We are hiring, so if anyone likes to do JavaScript, Python backend type stuff, look at our career page at leadgenius.com/careers. All right. So the premise of this talk is if you want to be a great developer, you need to do some bad things. So, and what does that mean? That means you need to write some bad code. You need to become uncomfortable with some of the things that you're doing. And you need to fail publicly. There's a great blog post that I found around when I was creating this presentation where it said, the author says, every developer is an idiot. The willingness to admit your idiocy and reflect on it is how we measure seniority. So that's a great way of putting it. I kind of came up with this talk. I was sitting down with coffee with a friend, and he was a computer science major. He came over from South Africa, so he could, with his wife, and he had some kind of like, I guess, work visa problems or something. He couldn't get a job initially, and so he started his own business. He's been running this business. It's been pretty successful, but he wants to use his skills now as a developer. And he was kind of having a hard time getting back into it and learning a lot of the newer things. And you know, after we were talking, and he was like asking me some questions, like, you know, a lot of it, like, it doesn't even matter. You can be like really bad and just figure it out as you go along. And so that same day, they had the call for talks. And I really didn't think this was like the greatest topic, but I submitted it and they accepted it. So here we go. So, you know, this talk may be a total failure. Just a warning, and if it is, just consider this a guide to giving a bad presentation. So, and also, you can really be bad if you have a backup plan. So we have Alex. He's giving a talk on good enough is good enough tomorrow. So if you don't believe me, maybe the next level is instead of just being bad, you can be good enough. So maybe he's got a lot more experience than I do. Also, my Bluetooth beacon, I actually didn't lock it down properly, so if you can hack that and change the URL, people won't be able to find my talk and stuff, so, you know, good. You know, I always like to give a little hacking challenge, so. All right, so once again, that's the premise of the talk. We need to, if you want to be great, you need to do some bad things. So you may be asking yourself, okay, well, why should I be bad? And it's not, you know, just so that you can, act cool and have lots of women and sell some drugs and stuff and be like our hero here, right? But that's actually not the right question, because here's the secret. There's a good chance you're already doing it. Great example, so I added this slide actually this morning after Raymond's talk. So think about it, right? Raymond's talking about core developers. I copied this off the site, and it's saying how like core developers have to have like consistently good patches, and you know, so these guys have to be really good, right? But yet we're like hearing all these stories of like how the patches aren't that great. So maybe these guys are a little bit bad still, right? I mean, these, like for me, like these are the ultimate developers, the guys who write Python, the stuff I use every day. So there's a good chance you're already bad. Okay, so, but you're saying, like, I'm too good, like, I'm not even a core developer, I'm just even better than them, so maybe you still think you're winning here. Well, maybe that doesn't matter either. because especially in our industry, in development, stuff changes really fast. So technology changes. Who here is writing Python 1 code still? 5 years from now, who's going to be writing Python 2 code? Maybe some of us. 10 years from now. So technology changes really fast. At your work, projects change. If you're at a startup, stuff can pivot, and all of a sudden, you're writing a social app, and next day you're writing a business app. So a lot of the code that you just wrote doesn't matter. People change. Maybe you are a senior developer, you go into management, and a lot of times we have this idea, I hate managers, but if it was like someone who's technical, that would be awesome, right? Well, chances are if you're a senior developer and then you go into management, you're probably going to be a little bad at first. So maybe your code is good today, but is it going to be good tomorrow? So Buckminster Fuller came up with this idea of knowledge is doubling. And so he theorized that up until like around 1900, every 100 years, knowledge was doubling. And then, I don't know, around like 1920, 1930, it started compressing in the 1900s. And now some are actually saying today, this is like really hard to measure. So, it's not like we have hard numbers on that, but some are saying today, with the advent of the internet, now our friend Buckminster here, he actually died in the 80s before the internet became popular. So some are saying now that knowledge is doubling every year, and maybe within like 20 years, knowledge will actually be doubling every 12 hours. So there's a good chance that what you wrote today will become very bad soon. So the real question is not whether you're like good or bad that you should be asking yourself, is why should you identify as being a bad developer? So there's a couple things. The first one is what's called a cognitive bias. So it's our mind sometimes just falls into like certain routines, of how we are as humans. And so it's called the sunk cost fallacy. Maybe you know this as the IKEA effect. So why IKEA is so popular is because we put a lot of time into building this really crappy furniture, right? But because we put so much time into it, we love it. We don't want to get rid of it. So again, you may think you're great, but is it just because you put a lot of time into that piece of code? Another effect, and I have these references at the end of the talk. There's a book called The Religious Mind, where the author describes our mind as an elephant with a rider on the top. So a lot of times we think of logic as like, I just reasoned about it. But our mind is the elephant, and our logical part of our mind is the rider. And so a lot of times our logic is just following where the elephant is going. So if you identify as a bad developer, right, it's easier to accept feedback. You're not going to think that your system is like this bulletproof thing that's never going to change and always going to be optimal. So the last thing, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, is it actually improves your learning. And we're going to talk about what's called the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition. There's a great link by Dave Thomas. It's a talk he gave, and it's more about managing developers. It's called herding racehorses and racing sheep. And he talks more in depth about this model. I can't really go into it a lot, so there's also the Wikipedia link, because that could be like a whole seminar on this. But basically, this guy Dreyfus and his colleagues came up with a model of how we learn things. He came up with it by looking at nurses and doctors, but it applies to a lot of other professions, anything where you want to acquire that skill. It's not a perfect model, but it gives us a good picture of how things might work, and it gives us something to talk about. And what he found, here you can see in the pyramid, is that there's different levels of your learning. So we have the novice here, and the novice actually needs a lot of rules in order to start learning. If you give a novice too many options, they're just going to kind of shut down and not be able to do anything. Whereas we go up more into the expert level, you know, the expert is kind of our wizard of programming, right? I mean, we probably all know a few. And they kind of just have an intuitive grasp, because they've been doing things so long, of the skill or the talent that they've acquired. And a lot of times, they can break the rules and not even know it, that they're breaking the rules. All right, so like I said, I can't really talk about this forever, but I wanted to just give some key takeaways from the model. So the first one, like I said, at the beginning, maybe think of these rules as our best practices in programming. So these best practices aren't necessarily things that are set in stone. These are the beginnings of how we teach people, and they're good to start with, but if you want to move up that ladder of learning, you actually have to break some of these rules. And actually what can happen, let me go back here, is if you kind of stick to these rules or these best practices too much, you can get stuck at the lower layers here. And so it's a pyramid for a reason, because at the top we don't have many experts. Most people actually fall into the first two levels. And a lot of people get stuck at that advanced beginner stage, and they never go past that stage. Maybe they follow the rules too much, or the best practices too much, or maybe they've learned the wrong things. And so as you look at this room of engineers, this is where most of us are at. And also think about this too. Next time you go to the doctor, this came from the medical field. Where's your doctor at on this? So, think about that. Maybe you do need a second opinion. And again, like I said, experts often break the rules and they don't know why, and because it's very intuitive for them. And also, it's hard for them to kind of rationalize. I think they can get to it, but a lot of times it just comes so quickly they're not even thinking about it. So on your teams too, if you start questioning your experts too much, they're gonna eventually start getting mad, because they're like, well, don't you just understand it? Raymond gave a good example in his keynote, like the core developers aren't normal people. They need to know the normal use cases. So they've risen to the top and are our wizards. So sometimes we need to give them more context. Some other takeaways. Being an expert is highly dependent on your environment. So the language you use, your work environment. Maybe you're an expert in Python and you go to JavaScript, you're no longer an expert. So this is the hard part. So for the experts, right, you can actually be an expert and a novice at the same time. And that's what kind of hurts us mentally. And that's why I say you need to be bad, because in order to keep up with technology and this doubling of knowledge, you're going to have to learn to be an expert and a novice at the same time. So, and that gives us again, a cognitive bias where we don't like that. Once we make it up to the top, we kind of don't want to go down to the bottom anymore. So a good story was from a Google developer advocate. He was on a plane with, he sat next to Vint Cerf, who helped invent the internet. And Vint Cerf asked him, hey, will you teach me how to build a progressive web app. So we got this guy who invented the internet, who has to ask, I don't think the developer was a novice, but who has to ask someone who, you would think is at a lower level, well, how should I build a web app? So, I think that's the model we want to follow. Even if you've invented the internet, you need to talk to some novices and learn over and over again. So this is a time now where I will give my shameless plug of the talk. So this is my son, Ethan, and he has a YouTube channel. He has like 30 subscribers. So if you want to click on that link, his channel is called Ethernet. And if you want to subscribe to his channel, it's really bad. I'll admit that, but whenever he gets like 1 subscriber, he's really excited. But I put this here for a reason. The same thing happened to me. So as I'm writing this presentation, I was having a conversation with a friend, and he's starting a YouTube channel. And he's asking me all these questions, and I was like, I really don't know the answer. I've been doing web development for a long time. My son, though, he started a YouTube channel a year ago when he was 8. So maybe we should just go ask him. So once again, you would think like, well, I'm a Python web developer. I need his expertise to learn about YouTube. All right. So now here's where I'm going to change the talk a little bit. And so what I did was compile some bad programming techniques or things that sometimes we look down on. And let me start there's a link up here. So at the end, I'm going to try to get some questions or comments. So also, if you have like really bad stuff that you like to do, you can go there, or we can pass the mic around or whatever. I want to know some of the bad stuff that is considered bad, but maybe you really like to do it. All right, so this one, again, I threw this in from the keynote. Maybe you should contribute a patch to core Python implementing enum. Obviously, Raymond doesn't like this, and it'll probably get rejected. But I think that's great, though, right? That developer submitted the patch, and he had the courage to pull it out and pull it back. And so I think the more important thing is now he understands Python better than he did before. So he failed really publicly and had the courage to pull it out and learn from that. And he's going to be awesome probably afterwards. All right. So this one's from the Linux kernel. Happened, I don't know if I have the date on there, but it happened maybe like 5 years ago. So someone emailed the Linux kernel on their mailing list. And so back in the 60s, we have the article that says go-to statements considered harmful. And so Rob Wilkins over here emailed the list, and he says, hey, I see all these go-to statements in the Linux kernel. Like, I thought these are evil, and like no one should use them. And Linus comes back and says, no, you're actually been brainwashed, and they can be used in the right way. And so you can really see the Dreyfus model in action. They're actually kind of both right. Because as the beginner, yes, following the rules, he probably shouldn't be using a go-to statement. And he should just follow the best practices. Because he's not going to know how to apply the go-to statement properly. But Linus is actually, he's the wizard. So he knows when to apply that. So that's like a perfect example of that in action. All right, let's see. Where does my mouse go? It's on the wrong screen. All right, frameworks are evil. So a lot of times you see like blog posts like, oh, don't use JavaScript frameworks, or don't use this web framework. And this is correct criticism. They are hard to control. They do shape how you code things. Libraries are maybe easier to use at first, but maybe they get a little bit messy. But we got to remember now, because frameworks give you more rules, they're optimized for the novice. So if you have more novices on your team, maybe you would be more comfortable to use a library, but are you going to provide the training? You know, like with Django, for example, there's lots of Django training. You can go to Django conferences. There's great documentation. Are you going to write all that documentation for your code base so that other people can learn your code? You can get a lot of that for free and maybe train up those novices and use that framework. Now, I do think we have like a gem in the Python community because Django has the philosophy of things are optional. So a lot of frameworks will kind of like say, this is how we do it and that's it. Django is really awesome because you can kind of take those best practices and start with those. And then as you grow or as you change, you can pull those out. So I do a lot of web development once again. So that's why I know a little bit about the Django criticisms. All right, so I got this from a friend. I had a friend. He said, you know what? When I hang out with devs, like I actually like to use Windows. Like everyone has a Mac. So I don't necessarily think this is like a Python community thing, but I do think like I've been in a few startups and people kind of look down if you have like a Windows machine. So, you know, and I think if you can't like accept a Windows machine and you're trying to be like this diverse environment, that's, you know, how are you going to like be diverse and inclusive if you can't even have like a Windows machine on your network? So there's that. Deploy badly. So once again, kind of from the web world, Peter Baumgartner, I guess, hopefully I said that right. And he gave a great talk about how you should deploy your web apps. And he goes over all the different things that you should do. You know, it should be able to roll back so you don't have, you know, if something happens, you can put it back. You should, you know, have no downtime. So, you know, spin one system up and take the other system down. But maybe you should just like, I put those in there. Those are some commands sometimes that I use. Just try and deploy it badly. Like, if the site goes down for 2 seconds, maybe it doesn't matter for you. So try it out. All right. Oh, so a lot of times you hear, okay, this language sucks, or this framework sucks, or this library sucks. It's not mature. It doesn't do everything I really need to do it to do. And you know, some of these can be true. My question would be, if it's a popular library or popular framework or popular language, why is it getting popular? Maybe it doesn't do everything you need to do, but come back and check it out again. Also, you know, sometimes you see those like posts on I read some Hacker News, right? And you'll see like, I'm leaving the Python community, or I'm leaving the JavaScript community and going to Go or going to Node or whatever, right? Guess what? You can do multiple languages. Like, it's okay. Like, it's all right. You know, I do a lot of JavaScript now, and again, it felt kind of bad doing JavaScript because I've come from this Python world where everything is clean and there's the right way to do things. But now that I've done it, I've learned different ways of coding and different ways of doing things, and so it's helped me to improve my coding skills. All right, here's another one I got as a contribution. Never write any comments. Maybe you should just like write better code. I don't know. Instead, it could be good or bad. All right, here's another one. User ORM, too. You'll get expert people who will say, well, an ORM won't give you the optimal SQL. But again, an ORM is really designed for novices. So you're writing this optimal SQL. Does the rest of your team understand that? Write one-liners. So this is another contribution I got. So I had like someone tell me, she's like, I really love to write one-liners that you can't really understand. So I don't really have a reason why this might be good, but there's something in there if she likes to do it, right? There must be something good about it. Here we go. We always hear like write tests at conferences, right? Tests do cost us, right? So maybe you should try skipping tests. So there was some good research, I think, out of Microsoft where they've basically said that, you know, it's not like tests are magical. Tests just kind of get us to think about our code more. And so that's really, when it comes down to it, why they're beneficial. We also get the benefit of having something we can run again. But a lot of times, just from us like thinking about writing the test and writing our code and kind of slowing down, that's what really is beneficial. So maybe there's another way that you use to think about your code more, or more in depth, or think about how it should be implemented. So maybe you shouldn't write a test. This one was from a couple weeks ago. So Uber said that we moved off of Postgres and we used a schemaless MySQL. So if you were to ask me as a web developer what to recommend, and they gave good reasons and it was awesome, but I still don't know if I'd ever recommend to anyone to use a schemaless MySQL setup. So, but they recommended it, and it worked for them. And if you've read the follow-up, the Postgres developers were awesome. They came back and said, yes, this is a use case that we aren't meeting right now, and so what do we need to do to meet this use case? So that was awesome. I thought that was a good conversation. All right, so now I'm going to go, I got 4 comments here from the link. So let's present this. All right, so let's see what we got here. When I write experimental code, I love to use single variable names, maybe 2 characters. The exact meaning of the word changes a lot, and long variables get in the way, as long names are clear and load variables 1 character. So actually, okay, I'm gonna admit this. I actually kind of like to write like short names even in production code.
Comment on this. I can't comment, but I put a question.
Yeah, but like sometimes like we get these like really high level extractions, and so like sure, like I like to like explain what the thing is in the variable, but it's like, well, it's really just like a widget. So like maybe short name's okay. That's a good one. I actually like to do that. All right, here we go. We got one from Alex. Go-tos, structured programming, have you read? Okay, there's a link. Maybe I'll tweet that link out. Rather than delimiters might be more feasible for expressing load structure than the same source language, 1974. So yeah. I'm not much of a C person, so I don't know. Of a C person. I've learned a little bit of C, or I'm guessing that's what the Linux kernel is written in C, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important using it in very structured.
Yeah.
C has a problem of where do you leave the function, especially functions that are deep, low-level system functions like that. It's basically like an exception. So if you use still two blocks, you jump to the top one and leave from a single place
Yeah.
properly. So it's kind of
Yeah, it's much more elegant, right? Yeah. All right, here we go. Short variable names again. That's preferred Go style and not just for experimental code. Cool. Now, the only problem with this question system is I tried to use it last time when I practiced this talk, and it didn't let me save any of these. So I'm going to try and save these afterwards and maybe like tweet them out or something. All right. Tests don't replace thinking about code. Again, once again, these are bad practices. Don't just go do them because I said go do them. But maybe you should try something out. Written tests become immediate sunk costs if the requirements are sliding around, yes. Do what needs to be done and learn what you need to do, yeah. So once again, I mean, I've had like several projects that just get thrown out, right? And so tests, it doesn't matter. I had someone comment where that came from was he had a client. The client didn't want to spend money on tests. So he didn't, that's extra effort. So, if you're not getting paid, that's probably a good reason not to do it, right? Okay, failing publicly and admitting idiocy. Any suggestions for populations who may be judged differently? Yes. So I'm fairly self-aware and knowledge about my strengths and weaknesses, but as a woman and a junior dev, when I'm admitting my ignorance, I'm not often told that I need to present more confidently. Yeah, and actually that's a really good question. And there was like a recent post somewhere about Google's hiring practices where they asked you how good a developer are you on a scale of 1 to 5. And if you're a man, the correct answer is 4, because males tend to exaggerate their ability. But if you're a woman, the correct answer is 5, because they tend to exaggerate or not exaggerate their ability and maybe even downplay it. So if a woman says that they're a 5, they know she's going to be really good, which is kind of just stupid, right? This is just from their data. But this is what they use for hiring decisions, apparently, which I think is really just, yeah, okay. Okay. But that's what this post said. But yeah, now, and I've been in environments like this where, yeah, you do get judged for if you do admit you're wrong. The only thing is, I still think it's valuable, because what happens is your team or that person who's judging you ends up staying at that level. And sure, you'll have some mistakes, you'll have some bad times, but eventually your learning is going to increase a lot faster than the rest of the team or the person that's judging you. That's what I've seen. But again, like I've been doing development a little bit long, so like I don't really care as much anymore. But as a junior dev, yeah, that's a hard thing. And like I said, you'll accelerate your learning still. And so eventually, I think people will appreciate your skills as they grow. All right, you can implement a class that implements iter and length and get item in the same class and see people get confused. That's an awesome bad practice. I like that. That kind of reminds me of, and he talked about it in the last talk, James Powell. He runs the New York Python meetup. His blog is don't use this code. And then he has the domain seriously don't use this code. So that reminds me of his code. So yeah, go use some of his code.
Sorry, what's that practice about? Any
It's just confusing. I think it's just,
mapping must implement those three methods. Any mapping.
well, this sounds like an open space. So.
Implement all three to the mapping. That means that writing the mapping is bad practice? Why? Of course they're going to be consistent. That's different.
Okay, yeah, let's do an example after. But this is great. This is I was expecting some tension to come out. All right, the Toyota second paradox, slow down to hurry up. ESP in mission critical and safety critical domains. This is very important. Slowing down the stabilize requirements and design. Okay, I guess I never heard of the second paradox. So if you want to, if someone wants to explain this. We have the mic. The mic.
The first paradox is what is behind the combine system that is behind just behind.
Okay.
And the second paradox, this is the beginning of second paradox, which is the slow down paradox. So especially
Okay.
second paradox, when I find it is my company that slow down to hurry up. It's like, oh, we have to figure it out.
Yeah.
You know, fail early, not fast. So
Okay.
this is kind of like for them a bad practice.
Okay. So yeah, I think for me, like a lot of times, like I'll get a project and they want to get it done quick. But if I have like some junior developers, like I feel like if I take some time and like do some training, we can go a lot faster, right? Just take a little bit of time. We all get on the same page. So maybe that's kind of what you're saying too, like stuff like that. Cool. All right. Any other questions, or they don't have to be bad comments either, or bad practices. Let's see. So resolve to be bad. And like I said, here's some references I'll tweet out, or I guess we'll have the link to the talk somewhere. And this is some of the books that I talk about, and another good one is Be Bad First. So, you know, you don't have to be bad all the time. It's just about experimenting and learning is really the key to it, right? We have to start there and keep on continuing to do it. All right. If there's no other comments, you have a question?
Just a comment. There was one of the lightning talks yesterday. Had a really good spot. When you're learning about something, make something funny. Then you don't worry that people might use
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so in the lightning talk, he said make something funny or make something that people don't use so that you feel safe. This is kind of on that line. What I'm saying, though, is get used to feeling unsafe because it's going to happen to you, right? So get used to it. So, but yeah, that helps too.
It's interesting to me also when you say be bad, you obviously mean also be more humble, be more open.
Yes, yeah.
And in relation to what somebody commented about men being more confident
Yeah.
about themselves than women, there was a psychological study done 30 years ago where students who scored over 95% of the test, when they were asked how they scored before they knew results, said 90, 92, 88. And guys who scored 40 said 85.
Yeah.
They were so overconfident that it's amazing. It's incredible.
Yeah, and like I said, being overconfident, then you're not going to accept the feedback. So, and you know, a lot of times you'll get stuck at those lower levels then. So those guys are 40s, but they think they're 80s. They think they're higher on that pyramid. They're going to be stuck.
Dunning-Kruger effect. Yeah, when you're so
Yes.
bad, you don't get that you're
Yeah, and so,
that's not the sense of bad.
yes. So that book, You Aren't So Smart, that has like that has that in there. It has like 40 something different cognitive biases that basically our brain kind of falls into, and that's another one of those biases that's in there with the sunk fallacy. So it's a good book. You can learn how dumb you really are. So, all right. Well, thank you for coming.